Hey there, have you ever wondered who the king of the north is? Who is the king of the south? Well, in this video, we find out. Hey there, this is Kenneth Moore from Zion's Watchman Media, a channel where we talk about things like health, history, and the Bible. So if you're new here, be sure to subscribe below and to click on the bell for notifications. Alright, so now we are on to Daniel chapter 11, a huge chapter with a lot of information in it. Now last time in chapter 10 we left off with Gabriel the angel appearing to Daniel, and he was going to give Daniel more information of the events that would take place in the world during the 2300-day prophecy, and how God's people would relate to all of this. Now this is what he had to say. And now I will shew thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So after King Cyrus, who was the king of Persia, 3 more kings were to arise. These would be Cambyses II, Smerdis, and Darius the First. And afterwards, a 4th king would arise that would be richer than them all and would agitate Greece. This is speaking of Xerxes the First. Now Xerxes determined to conquer over the Greeks, and to do this, he organized a huge army of almost 5 million men, and it was in the famous Battle of Thermopylae that he defeated Greece. This battle is famous for the 300 Spartan soldiers who were able to resist Xerxes' army, but were later betrayed, causing them to be defeated. Now Xerxes would later go on to suffer a huge defeat by Greece in the year 480, and thus the Persians would retreat back into their own country. And the Bible continues and says, And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. So after all of this, another mighty king would arise and would conquer. This is speaking of Alexander the Great, who conquered over Persia. But the Bible said that his kingdom would not be given to his descendants or his posterity. Instead, what happened was, when Alexander died, his son was actually killed, and his kingdom was split up into 4 parts by his 4 generals. These generals were Cassander, that had Macedon and Greece towards the west, Lysimachus, which had Thrace and Bithynia in the north, Ptolemy, that had Egypt in the south, and Seleucus, which had Syria and the rest of the kingdom towards the east. Now the Bible goes on to say in verse 5, And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Alright, so now we are introduced to this king of the south, and this is speaking of Ptolemy I Soter, who was the king of Egypt. And he would be strong, for he would later go on to strengthen Egypt by conquering over territories such as Cyprus, Libya, and others. The Bible also said that one of Alexander's other princes would be strong also. This is speaking of Seleucus, who was the king of the east, or Syria. He would later conquer over Lysimachus in the north and form a huge Seleucid empire. Thus he would not only be the king of the east, but he would also become the king of the north. And his empire would cover much more territory than that of Egypt. Thus, as the verse said, he became stronger than Egypt. Verse 6, And in the years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. The verse begins by speaking of an alliance that was made between the kingdoms of the north and the south, and this was done with Antiochus Theos, the 3rd king of Syria, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, the 2nd king of Egypt. And this alliance was made through marriage, and it was to stop the frequent fighting that was going on between the 2 kingdoms. It was agreed that Antiochus Theos, who held the north, would put away his wife Laodice and her 2 sons, and would marry Berenice, who was the daughter of Ptolemy Philadelphus. But the verse said something interesting. It said, She shall not retain the power of the arm. In other words, Berenice would lose her power. Shortly after the marriage, Antiochus went back to his former wife Laodice and her sons, and left Berenice. The verse also said, "Neither shall he stand nor his arm." This is speaking of Antiochus Theos, for Laodice, fearing that she would be removed again, decided to kill Antiochus by poisoning him. "And she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times." Berenice is the she that would be given up, for Laodice would murder her, along with those who brought her, her Egyptian women and attendants, and the he that begat her is the son that Berenice gave birth to. The verse also said, "And he that strengthened her in these times." This is referring back to Antiochus Theos. Laodice killed them all, and after poisoning her husband, she made her eldest son, Seleucus II Callinicus, king over Syria. "But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt, their gods and their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land." In verse 7, the branch of her roots is speaking of the brother of Berenice, Ptolemy III Euergetes, who would become king over Egypt. And he, to avenge the death of his sister, came into the kingdom of the north, Syria, and waged war against it. In this he was successful, but later he was forced to return back to Egypt because there was news of a rebellion. Now the verse also said that he shall carry captives into Egypt, their gods, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold. This is because before leaving, Ptolemy III totally plundered Syria and took huge amounts of their wealth, silver and precious vessels, and many images of their gods. And the verse ends by saying that this king of the south would actually continue more years than the king of the north, for Ptolemy III ended up living longer than Seleucus. Verse 10, "But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come, and overflow, and pass through. Then shall he return, and be stirred up, even to his fortress." Okay, so this verse begins by speaking of the two sons of Seleucus Callinicus, Seleucus III Soter, and Antiochus the Great. These two were the ones who were stirred up to avenge their defeated father and their country. And the older of the two, Seleucus III, became king, and with his brother created a large army to recover the lost territory. But later, Seleucus III would be poisoned by two of his chief officers. Because of this, his brother, Antiochus the Great, took the throne next, and with his army he recovered the lost territory in Seleucia and Syria. Like the verse said, Antiochus the Great was truly the one who overflowed and passed through. In other words, he conquered. Verse 11, "And the king of the south shall be moved with color or rage, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, and he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand." Now we see how the king of the south, or Egypt, retaliated. Ptolemy Philopator was the successor of his father, Ptolemy III Euergetes. And Philopator was moved with rage to stop Antiochus the Great from taking everything over. And it was in the Battle of Raphia or Gaza that these two kings met off. And this battle was actually fought with men and elephants. And here Antiochus the Great was defeated. Verse 12, "And when he have taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it." After Philopator's victory at Gaza, instead of pushing forward to conquer the rest of Syria, he became proud and gave himself up to laziness, feasting, and pleasure. This foolishness caused his Egyptian subjects to rebel against him. Not only this, he would later come to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices, but not being satisfied with this, he would attempt to push himself into the inner part of the temple and be refused. It is said that he was struck by God with terror and confusion, and had to be carried out of the temple like a half-dead man. This caused him to hate the Jewish nation and to persecute the Jews living in Egypt, and he slayed tens of thousands of them. With the loss of so many Jewish subjects and the rebellion among the Egyptians after his victory at Raphia or Gaza, he definitely was not strengthened by his victory, just as the Bible said. Verse 13, And the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army, and with much riches. There was a period of peace that came about between Ptolemy Philopator and Antiochus the Great. But once Philopator died, and his infant son, 5 years old, Ptolemy Epiphanes, came to the throne, Antiochus the Great decided to take advantage of the situation and built a huge army to take Egypt. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. Others beside Antiochus the Great were going to rise up against this young king. For Ptolemy Epiphanes was a child and had a prime minister named Agathocles, who conducted the business of Egypt in place of the young king. But Agathocles, being a proud and arrogant ruler, ended up leading certain Egyptian territories to rebellion. Not only this, Antiochus the Great entered into an agreement with King Philip V of Macedonia to go up against Egypt, and then to divide the territories of Egypt among themselves. Thus many stood against the king of the south at this time. Now the verse also mentioned the robbers of thy people, or the children of the violent among thy people. This is actually speaking of Rome, who would arise at this time and would start interfering with Egypt and Syria in this political turmoil. What happened was the guardians of Ptolemy Epiphanes, seeing the bad situation that they were in, sought out the Romans and requested help. In turn, Egypt gave them control over their kingdom until the young Epiphanes grew up into maturity. And they also gave guardianship of the young king to Rome, so that Rome could tutor him. Rome accepted these conditions, and then they went to Antiochus the Great and Philip V and threatened to wage war on them if they did not abandon their plan. And in this, the Romans sent M. Aemilius Lepidus, a Roman senator, to Egypt, and he appointed a man by the name of Aristomenes to be the young king's guardian and tutor, and he would help rule Egypt while the king was young. Here we see the beginning of Rome's interference and self-exaltation. Now the verse said specifically that they would be the robbers of thy people. In other words, they would be the robbers of the Jews. For Rome would rob the Jews of their independence in 63 AD. They would take their temple away from them by destroying it in 70 AD, and they would take Jerusalem away from them by destroying Jerusalem in 135 AD. And Rome would establish the vision. In other words, they would help fulfill this prophecy. But they shall fall. This can apply to Antiochus the Great and Philip V, who would both suffer defeat by the Romans later on, or it can be applied to Rome itself, who would fall in 476 AD. Verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, or the most fortified city. And the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. Later what happened was Aristomenes sent a general by the name of Scopas to raise reinforcements for the Egyptian army. And with Antiochus being occupied fighting another war, Scopas by Egypt was sent into Palestine and Syria, Antiochus's territory, and they took Judea and brought it under the control of Egypt. This caused Antiochus to retaliate to recover the lost territory. Scopas later fought with Antiochus at Jordan, but he was defeated and had to flee to Sidon, a very fortified city. And here Antiochus would cast up a mount, or lay siege to him. The verse also said, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. Scopas could not stand against him, but also others, for Egypt sent 3 chosen generals to try to help Scopas, but they all failed. Eventually Scopas, because of a famine, had to surrender the city, and he left with his soldiers stripped of everything except their lives. Thus Sidon, the city of fortifications, was taken. So thus ends the major clashing between the king of the north and the king of the south for now. We will see more later between these two powers. Now in our next study on Daniel chapter 11, we're going to keep going down through these verses, and we're going to see more of the rise of the Roman power and the role that it would play in the stream of time. Now I hope that this video has given you a better historical view of what happened in the world during this 2300-day period. And I hope that this video has also shown you that God has a foreknowledge of everything that is going to happen in this world, And he has told us so that we will be aware ahead of time and so that we will not be caught off guard. History shows us that God's word can be trusted and that it can be relied upon. So I will leave you with that. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more, be sure to subscribe below and to click on the bell, and we will see you in the next one. Until next time.